You are listening to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth. Today I'm going to be talking with Isaac Golden on the changes to government rebate on natural therapies for private health insurance in Australia and the history of the marginalisation of natural medicine in Australia. Isaac Golden has been a homeopathic practitioner since 1984. He founded the Australasian College of Hahnemannian Homeopathy in 1990. He's a regular contributor to local and international academic journals and the author of 11 homeopathy books and over 100 articles. He's a world authority on homeoprophylaxis, a homeopathic medicine for infectious disease prevention. Isaac was the first person to be awarded a PhD from a mainstream Australian university for research on a homeopathic topic. He worked in a range of positions with Endeavour College of Natural Health until 2012, then became the Honorary Research Fellow, Faculty of Science at the Federation University Australia from 2013 to 2016. He is currently the Research Advisor and Deputy Chair on the Ethics Committee of the National Institute of Integrative Medicine and a peer reviewer for a number of Australian and international professional journals. From 1992 to 1998, he was President of the Victorian branch of the Australian Homeopathic Association. Thank you for coming on to Voice of the Voiceless, Speak Your Truth today, Isaac.
No, that's my pleasure, Emily, and thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, no worries. This is my passion. Can you talk us through the history of the Australian Medical Association trying to marginalise natural medicine in Australia?
Well, it's much more than the Australian Medical Association. They're just really one part of the whole plan. Okay. What's happened is that there's been, over the last, more than a decade now, there's been a very coordinated attempt around the world to target natural medicine. In some countries, they started with homeopathy, and in Australia they did as well, because that's the easiest target, because the medicines used in homeopathy are not prepared in a way which orthodox medicine recognises, because we use energetic medicines, not medicines of substance, like, for example, in nutritional medicine or herbal medicine.
Yeah.
But then it's expanded to really all forms of natural medicine. So the AMA has been a part of this in its latest incarnation. But I remember when I first moved to Victoria about 30 years ago, the AMA was trying, not long after I moved down here, to prevent medicines being sold through health food stores. And there was a massive public response to that. There were petitions that were circulated through all of the health food stores in Victoria, and we won. The consumers won, and it denied the attempt by the AMA to stop even something like vitamin C from being sold in the health food store. And then about 10 years later, the AMA tried again to make it that only doctors could practice acupuncture. And, of course, a lot of doctors who do practice acupuncture have just learnt it over a few weekends intensive courses, whereas someone who has learnt acupuncture properly has spent at least 4 years full-time and quite often more. So the AMA has, which is basically, let's face it, the doctors' trade union, that's really not all that the AMA is, it's tried over the years to marginalise natural medicine, but there's much more powerful forces at work now than the AMA. And I think you were going to ask about something that has happened over the last decade, 6 major events.
Yep.
And probably if we talk about them now, it will tie the AMA into this. So I've been talking about this for a year or more now, but This series of events started in the United Kingdom in 2005, and there was an article in the journal Lancet and also an editorial by the editor of Lancet. The editorial was headed "The Death of Homeopathy." The article was one prepared by Shang and Professor Eggers and a few others who are all very anti-homeopathy. And they claimed to have proved that homeopathy was ineffective. Now, they broke a number of rules that are used in orthodox medicine when preparing reports for medical journals. And of course, the Lancet is a medical journal. And one of the most important rules they broke was hiding the data that they used to draw their conclusion. And in fact, it took 2 years almost to finally get the data that they used. And what it showed was that they started with a group of 120 homeopathic studies and a matched 120 allopathic or pharmaceutical medicine studies. And they were meant ostensibly to compare the two groups. Well, they cherry-picked the numbers down until they got a result that they wanted. And then they didn't disclose that fact. They didn't disclose which studies they finally used. And this is very important because this technique, in a broad sense, has been used very recently in Australia by the NHMRC. Anyway, it was some years before the truth came out, and when people got the full data that the Shang report had relied upon and redid the analysis in a way that is accepted in orthodox medicine, they found that the result was positive for homeopathy. But on the basis of this false report, the United Kingdom Parliament set up a review panel. There were, I think, 13 members in the Health Committee on this panel. I think only 4 of them ever went to a meeting. The panel was chaired by a doctor who was very against homeopathy. They relied almost exclusively on this flawed report by Shang in the Lancet to actually draw their own conclusions, which recommended against homeopathy being included or continued in the British public health system. Their finding was rejected by the United Kingdom Parliament, but that has given impetus and has been used by the NHMRC in Australia to once again say homeopathy should be looked at and looked at very, very critically. But before that happened in Australia, there was a formation of a group here called the Friends of Science in Medicine. And this group contained quite a number of very highly credentialed doctors, professors of medicine, people who had won awards, Australian community awards. So a very influential group. And their first item on their agenda when they were formed was to stop universities researching natural medicine and teaching natural medicine topics. And if you go back, it's all on their website. People can examine it. You'll see quite clearly and unambiguously their first attempt was aimed at stopping the freedom of speech and freedom of research in the university sector. And this group has grown somewhat, and more importantly and significantly, it's influenced and integrated into a number of major scientific institutions in Australia, most notably the NHMRC, the National Health and Medical Research Council, which is Australia's peak medical science institute. And so in 2015, 2016, the NHMRC released preliminary reports into homeopathy, and then last year they finalised reports in not just homeopathy but 16 other forms of natural therapies. And basically what they said was that all of these forms of natural therapy lacked significant or any evidence of effectiveness.
Do you have the list of those 16? I'm just curious. Do you have listed the 16 other natural
I
medicine
actually
modalities.
do.
Okay.
Let me go through them.
Yep.
Alexander technique, aromatherapy, Ayurveda, which is the traditional Indian form of medicine,
Yep.
Rowan therapy, Buteyko, that's a breathing technique, Feldenkrais, herbalism, homeopathy, iridology, which is a diagnostic technique, not a therapy, of course, kinesiology, massage therapy, naturopathy, Pilates, reflexology, rolfing, shiatsu, tai chi, and yoga.
Okay.
So it's a pretty comprehensive list, and there's not a lot left standing. In fact, I don't think there's anything left standing, really.
Yeah.
So we really have focused on the NHMRC homeopathy report because that was the one that led the way.
Yep.
And what we found in that report was that there'd been, quite frankly, scientific fraud. And I'll come back to that if you'd like me to, but let me just finish this little circle. So the NHMRC report came out. That then influenced the analysis that the government was doing on private health insurance rebates. And you may well have heard, and your listeners may well have heard, that the government announced that it would next year stop private health fund rebate subsidies for natural therapies, or most of it, I think all but two on that list.
Okay.
And the Labor Party had said prior to the previous election that they would be doing that, and we can only assume the Greens would support that because the Greens were very, very involved in supporting the TGA attack on natural therapies. They also have had an input into the private health insurance rebate thing.
Okay. What's the TGA?
The Therapeutic Goods Administration, sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
I couldn't use acronyms. So that's the organisation, the government organisation that basically controls medicines, the quality of medicines.
Yep.
And so following from the NHMRC report, we've had a splitting off of the way that natural therapists are regulated in Australia because they're not, most of them are not registered. So in Victoria and in other states, and it's going to be uniform throughout Australia next year, I believe, if not this year, there are health complaints commissioners which have been formed. And I've been to three talks now by health complaints commissioners two talks by them and one by an agent in Victoria, South Australia and Western Australia. And basically we've effectively forced them to admit that if a complaint against a natural therapist comes to the Health Complaints Commission, and by the way, under the new Victorian legislation, this complaint doesn't have to be from a patient, it could be from anyone, particularly a member of the Skeptics Society or Friends of Science and Medicine. And they could just make a complaint saying, okay, Fred over here is or Mary is a naturopath. According to the NHMRC, naturopathy is a load of rubbish. It has no evidence. Therefore, Fred or Mary are defrauding their patients by claiming that they've got a form of medicine that may be helpful. So this NHMRC report is going to be used at the moment, the way things stand at the moment, by the health complaints commissions in different states as the starting point for the evidence base as to whether or not the form of medicine is going to be accepted or not. So it's very, very serious. There was also in 2017 something called the King Review, and it was to do with the use of natural therapies in pharmacies. Once again, the NHMRC report featured, and they basically recommended that natural therapies be placed away from real medicines in case consumers became confused. And this finally, just recently, the Parliament was considering legislation to change aspects of the Therapeutic Goods Administration. And we had the Friends of Science and Medicine, the